us hear the word agile, our minds jump straight to tech teams, software sprints, or sticky notes covering an entire wall. But listeners, imagine this. What if agile was more than just a project management framework? What if it was actually a mindset, a way of leading, working, and even living that could help us beat burnout, stay nimble in a world that won't slow down for sure, and still deliver results without draining ourselves or our teams? Well, welcome back, listeners, to today's episode of BizBlend. We are going beyond the buzzwords today. I'm your host, Sana, as always, and we are going to explore how Agile can act as a leadership playbook, not just for the techies, but for small business owners, entrepreneurs, and anyone trying to juggle priorities without running on fumes. And joining me is someone who knows this not just from theory, but from lived experience. Stepping into the role of president of the Persimmon Group just weeks before a global pandemic hit, she's led through uncertainty, preserved culture in chaos, and learned what it takes to stay resilient when the playbook falls apart. So, today she is sharing with us the lessons leaders can carry forward. Agile not just as a process, but as a path to healthier, smarter work. So, listeners, meet my incredible guest, Sara Gallagher. So, Sarah, welcome to the show, and it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Sarah, it's obvious, whenever, of course, I think kudos to the writer, but whenever we hear the word agile, even myself as well, I always go to the project management frameworks and all. Or, we normally use agile or nimble in values or principles of a specific company that too, very specifically related to software services or tech. But today we are going to understand how we can apply the essence of this word agile, not only in the way we do business or, or we look at from a professional perspective, but as a way of living. So I think in that way, this conversation is definitely going to be very unique. And listeners, please stay with us. We are going to definitely get some golden nuggets from here, from Sarah. So, Sarah, to begin with, as you have said, agile isn't just for tech, it's a mindset leaders can use anywhere. Um, how do you explain agile in a way that feels human, not just another tool?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm gonna briefly talk about what Agile is as a project management approach, but literally a 30, 45-second overview for people that don't know, because I think it's important to understand that when we talk about it as a mindset. So when you think about doing a project, the way that traditional projects are done is you decide what you're going to do, you decide when you're going to do it by, you create a plan, and then you stick to that plan. And a core responsibility of a project manager has been to control change, by which I don't mean block change, but what I mean is make sure that any change to the plan is really well analyzed, understood, communicated, and valuable, right? So it's not a bad way to do projects, but when Agile came along, its its purpose was kind of an answer to a big problem with traditional projects, which is if you're spending a lot of your time controlling change, but change is happening almost constantly,
Mm,
PMs were starting to feel a little bit like a human shield, trying to, block change on their projects. So the
mm,
people that created Agile really asked a big question, which is what if change is a feature, not a bug? What if that is what we should be building our methodology around? How can we, uh, one of the Agile principles is welcoming change even late in development. And that was very radical, especially to traditional project managers. So I say that because when I think about Agile as a mindset, there's a few things that Agile project management brought that I would say weren't there before or weren't clearly called out. The first is acceptance of changing conditions. So knowing that if you have a 6-month effort, by month 3, your priorities may have changed, your business case may have changed, your stakeholder desires from what they told you they were 3 months ago may have changed. And in Agile, you learn to address that with an open hand as opposed to being frustrated that that change is occurring. And second is continuous learning. So you don't have to make a whole bunch of permanent decisions. You can make what I call for now decisions, learn from them, and then adjust. And that's also kind of a different way of looking at it. And then the third and final thing that I think is unique about Agile is measuring happiness. So with teams, they get together at every sprint, typically every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, and they do what's called a retro, which is where they talk about how that sprint went, how the work is going, what their stress level is, how they're working together. I know some teams that literally do a happiness flash poll to say, how are you emotionally after this sprint? And these are all things that I think definitely apply to life and leadership.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, to someone who hasn't, uh, you know, specifically, uh, like having I don't have that expertise into project management frameworks, but at least I can make a lot of, sense. Especially, I really, like connected with the last, the happiness part here. So I think it's definitely applicable into our daily lives as well. And Sarah, could you share a time when using agile principles personally helped you pull back from burnout or overwhelm?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I became president of this company, taking over for a beloved founder. And it was February 28th, 2020. So this was just 2 weeks before the first case of COVID hit my city, our headquarters. And at that point, we had to rethink everything about the way we did our business, how we delivered virtually, how we messaged, to clients, how we messaged things to our employees. And like many small businesses, we had to prepare for scenarios in which we would lose 10% of our revenue, 20% of our revenue. Every small business, I think in the world was thinking, preparing for these worst case scenarios. And what I remember from that time was that early on, we still were acting as if we could predict outcomes. And so we were doing a ton of detailed scenario planning and if then statements and, really getting wrapped around the axle in terms of, being able to move forward. And I think when we as a leadership team relaxed a little bit and we started to say, you know what, let's look at 5 things. Let's look at what we know for sure. Let's look at what we could easily go find out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's list the things that are impossible to know. And then for every decision, let's just talk about what's the risk of making a decision today and what's the risk of not making a decision today. And from there, we also explored an agile concept of sort of a for now decision. Is there any piece of this that we could decide now, see what the results are, learn from it, and then decide the rest later? you know? And for me, those things totally changed how fast we were able to act. They really helped us communicate decisions to employees better. Here's what we know today. Here's our decision based on what we know. And here are the things that might cause us to change our mind later. And so it just built a sense of trust and transparency during a time when everybody was scared. I mean, it's so interesting to think about how we all felt back then. If we remove what we know now and we really put ourselves back there, we didn't know if this virus was going to affect children. We didn't, we didn't know that it was not going to affect them as much as adults yet, so parents are totally freaked out. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know how long we would have to be at home. It was an uncertain time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really tested the resilience, the patience of the entire humanity, I think. Because,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it really definitely sounds like, a lot of firefighting in there. And specifically for small or medium businesses, I think it was definitely overwhelming. Um, so yeah, I think that really really makes a lot of sense, and I think listeners they will relate to this feeling, like when everything looks like feels like a fire drill, even a word framework itself it can feel heavy. The way the example that you gave, that those moments, those decisions, it makes it sound more like a lifeline, than just a rule book.
That's right. That's right. And, we were able to apply that to even very deeply personal decisions. So,
Mm.
I mentioned every small business was having to think about layoffs, furloughs, hiring freezes, salary freezes. And as we thought about worst case scenarios, we're a consulting firm, right? So we are considered a discretionary expense to a lot of companies. So we were expecting to lose a a significant portion of our revenue, at least temporarily. And so, we had to think about what would the trigger be to make a move. And initially, we were really stuck in all of these if thens. If this happens, then we'll do this. What we ended up doing was doing what I said, taking a step back and saying, what is a good for now decision? And what
Mm.
we decided to do was all we needed to really define was our guiding philosophy. And that was, and we share this with our employees, as companies think about worst case scenarios, some are going to layoffs, some are going to salary freezes, some are going to furloughs. We are not at the place where we have to do any of that now. But we do want you to know that our philosophy will be that we want everyone who works here now to still be working here at the end of this, even if
Mm.
that means salary cuts, because ethically, we don't want employees having to enter the job market in the middle of a pandemic and have that revenue loss. So even though every choice sucks, that we're choosing between a bunch of crappy options, you should know that that will be our approach. And so we didn't have to decide when we would do it and how much we would do it, right? We just had to know that that was the guiding philosophy. And then the second part of that was we will cut executive salaries first to the lowest amount we can live on before we touch your salary.
Mm. That is something very interesting, Sarah. Very interesting, and I think it's kind of exception as well.
Well, thank you. It was a tough decision. I
Yeah.
think that's sort of one thing I learned is, you think about leadership as like, you know, making the right decision, but most of the time you are choosing between a bunch of bad options. And
Mm.
so and they don't really teach you how to do that in decision-making trainings, I feel like.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um. And one of the biggest struggles leaders face is feeling like everything is urgent. I have to tend to all the matters because all
Mhm.
of them they are urgent. So how does Agile help leaders distinguish between what's truly priority and what's just noise?
So I think Agile has two principles here or practices that have been very instrumental in my time management. The
Mhm.
first is in Agile, when a team is planning what they are going to do for the next 2 weeks, The variable they hold as constant is the time available to do the work. So if they are going to work 40 hours a week, then each of them has 80 hours to do work, right?
Hmm.
And assuming that ceiling, the team decides what they can reasonably accomplish in that 2 week period. And if they overestimate, then the next time they still assume the same ceiling, but they may lower the amount that they're going to get done in a week. But the idea is, unlike a traditional project where you have peaks and valleys, and you might have like people working 80-hour weeks at the end of the project just to get it done, Agile says we're all going to work at the same pace all the time. And we are going to adjust our estimates to what that capacity is. And I did the same thing for me. I said, look, it is a pandemic, so I probably will work 10-hour days for a while. That's fine. But I'm not going to work more than 10-hour days. I'm going to have a shut off time. And the second thing I did from Agile, Agile has what's called a backlog, which is you could think of it like a to do list, the things you're going to build in rank order, top to bottom. So
Hmm.
rather than thinking about my to-do list as, these 10 items are high priority, these are medium, and these are low, I forced myself to write a numbered list, right? This is the most important thing, this is the second most important thing, this is the third most important thing. And I would single task down that list, knowing that in Agile, the list might get rearranged, and that's okay. But I always knew the thing that I should be working on next.
Hmm. And I think yes, this is powerful because like if I can, speak from a very general perspective, like we all know that um sinking feeling of, working non-stop only just to realize that we moved the wrong things forward.
Mm,
Um and I think the way you described it, agile, it creates more clarity, not more pressure. So I think the output automatically, it reflects in the quality of the deliverable or the output.
that's right. And, I think something I had to get used to during that time, which has still served me well today, is you're not ever going to be where you want to be at the end of a day. Like you're just not. It's moving too fast. There's too many interruptions. You're always going to have this low grade feeling of I didn't do enough. And that doesn't mean that you didn't do enough. It means that your psychology is craving completion. And with Agile, there's this thing called definition of done. So every task that you have, everything that you build, has a clear point at which you call it done. And it can help to break big things down into little things with their own definitions of done. Right.
Mm.
So by doing that, I was able to get the feeling of checking things off. But I did have to live with the idea that at the end of a day, my psychology, I am built as a type A person to believe I always could have done more. And it was the great sort of spiritual work of that time for me to accept that I worked to my capacity, and it was only harming me to
Yeah.
have that feeling of I should have done more. I had to let that go.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I can so much connect with that, Sarah, because that particular, feeling or that thought of I should have done more. This is not completed yet. It like consumes you from within.
It
Um.
does. It
Yes.
does.
It really clouds your clarity as well.
It does. And you had to put myself back in that time period. I probably wasn't moving actually as fast then as I can now because the same emotional fears and concerns about the pandemic itself and the future of the business that my employees had, I had too. So and when you have that emotional, adrenaline, you naturally, you might speed up in the short term, but over time you have that adrenaline crash. You're not
Yeah.
able to achieve as much. So I had to have a lot of empathy for myself there too, um, as well as I I found it very helpful to have vulnerability as well. So to share with my team members, I'm feeling this too. I get it. I'm not at my best right now, and I don't expect you to be at your best either. And that's okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And as I mentioned about burnout and also the psychology here, let's bring culture into the picture now.
Mm.
Sarah, you lead teams through virtual transitions and also polarized workplaces. Um,
Yes.
how does an agile mindset protect culture while still pushing for results?
Yeah, I think that's great. So, I would say one way that it protects culture is with a core value of transparency. So we knew that when we made a decision, whether that was if we're going to go back into the office or not, or if we're going to require vaccines, we knew that there would be a segment who would be upset with the decision. And so what we did is we made the best decision we could, and we shared our reasoning with the team, and we said we could be wrong, so we're going to continue to watch this, and if we start to see that, XYZ is happening, we're open to changing our mind on this. Right, and I think that that helped everyone feel respected, because we legitimately did, consider every position, uh,
Mm.
rigorously, and we would share that, "Hey, we get that there are 2 sides to this or 3, 4 sides, and, each of them was important for us to walk through and look at, and ultimately, here's where we've landed."
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that built a lot of trust, right? I mean,
It
eh,
did, yeah.
you're not gonna agree with everything, but I think if you feel like your leaders are truly listening
Mhm.
and sharing their rationale, it's much easier. I know when I, had leaders, it was always much easier for me to get on board with something that I felt they respected me enough to explain their reasoning.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But how does it would this be possible when you have got a very large organization, where there are 10,000, 20,000 employees, and there are different teams, different team leaders. How this would have been in that particular setting? I'm just
Yeah.
imagining.
That's a great question. And it's interesting because even though I run a small business, many of my clients are Fortune 500 giants,
Mm,
global companies, right?
mm,
And I would say this. I would say when I look at my client base, the companies, even the large ones, uh, usually can afford to be more transparent than they are, even if they can't be as transparent as a small business. And none of them can be. Um, I think there's also a skill, an organizational skill or capacity for change management that
mm,
some of my big clients are great at, and some change management is an afterthought. And when I say change management, I mean communicating decisions,
mm,
communicating humility in those decisions, preparing your workforce to enact those decisions, giving them all the tools they need to do that, um, and staying with them through the change to make sure that the change sticks, that the decision you made isn't quietly being sort of undermined, not necessarily intentionally, right? But by
mm,
people who either don't know how to enact the decision or don't want to. And so even large companies, if they, I know large companies that literally have a department for change management. And, that can be helpful, but it really starts at the top. It starts with explaining why you're doing what you're doing and acknowledging the opposite position. So these companies, for example, that have said, we're going to bring everyone back in the office because of the need for collaboration. You
Mm.
can also say, we understand that by doing this, we are giving up flexibility. We are giving up autonomy, and we know that that is painful, and we understand that it's a trade-off. We're going to do this anyway, and we're going to see how it works.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And Sarah, I think it's a very obvious one to bring in here now. Since we are talking about agile here, now with AI, I
Yeah.
had to bring it. Now, doing so much of project management, whether it's task tracking, reporting, even decision recommendations. Some leaders, for sure, I'm very confident they are going to wonder if agile will become less relevant. So, do you see AI as replacing agile practices or as a tool that could actually make it more powerful for, from the perspective of preventing burnout?
Oh, um, well, look, I think any position on AI is nuanced, but by and large, I think AI will enhance human agility rather than take away from it in the
Mm.
hands of skilled AI users. Um, I think that where where Agile really stands out personally and in teams is in its ingenuity, its innovation, its flexibility, it's trying things out, it's experimentation, right? And AI is sort of designed to feed you back the best of what's already been thought of. And so it is going to do really well at structuring things, even walking you through some logic around how to structure your backlog. It could do a really good job. I mean, it could even do things like look at the hours people are working and predict if burnout is going to happen, right? It can do some really amazing things. Um, but really, what I think it will do is free humans up to do uniquely human things. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see. I've noticed it already with our team and the work that we do is so much of the so I love this phrase, the tyranny of the blank page, right? So much time used to be wasted just getting ourselves started on something. Now we can get a draft quickly, but where humans are needed, and I think will be needed at least for a long time, is in judging the quality of that output and really pushing on AI from our experience. Only humans can physically feel the stakes of their decision. So we're naturally going to be looking at it much more closely, seeing risks, right? Seeing human implications of the decisions we're making that AI just can't do. It can measure sentiment, from the words you use. It can't really measure emotion. And so I see AI and humans as a fantastic partnership. Um, and I will it have negative side effects and negative impacts in some industries? Absolutely. I think what people who've been doing agile have going for them is that they have already learned the skill of adaptability. So as AI shifts what it can do and how it can do it, people who are agile can shift with it.
Wow. I absolutely love that answer, Sarah.
Mhm. Thank you. I spend a lot of time thinking about AI, especially as a small business owner, because it really will have a big impact. It's some negative ways and many positive ways for how work gets done.
Exactly, exactly. And this is prevalent over uh, generations because every generation has seen, either the industrial revolution or the dot-com boom or
Mm.
the computers, um, internet, social media. now AI. So I think we are definitely going to see. I'm really bullish, because it's never going to be AI versus humans or AI versus agile, but it's humans with AI, AI with agile. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
and I will say this. I will say this. I think who AI may hurt are entry level employees
Okay.
because when I look at our team and my clients, the people who already had 10 years of experience, AI is amplifying them so much because they know exactly how to push back on it, right? So I love the analogy of could you write a will using AI? Could you make a, legal decision? Maybe. But a lawyer with experience using AI to write that will, it's going to be much better. It's going to think through more contingencies, right? Because they know the right questions to ask AI. The people coming in now, though, who are entry level, don't have that experience. They don't know the questions to ask to push on AI to get a better output. And so, if they are over relying on AI at this stage, they're not potentially learning what they need to learn. And I think as leaders, we have to be thinking about how do we give them that experience? How do we really focus on mentoring them so that they're not just giving us muddled AI outputs? And if I were an entry level person, for example, my daughter's 11, and I have given her a list of what she is and isn't allowed to use AI for. And she is allowed to use AI to do research, and she's allowed to use it to maybe create an outline. At this age, she is not allowed to use it to write. And that will change. I said, "Look, someday it will actually become imperative that you use AI to write. But today, it's going to get in the way of you learning critical thinking." So you're 11. At 11, right? You aren't allowed to use it to write. You aren't allowed to use it as a friend or a therapist, right? So we have those boundaries, and I'm hoping that that really helps her prepare to enter the workforce without experience, but with a good understanding of how to use AI.
Totally, totally. And you really hit the nail in there, Sarah, because I was just about to mention that, especially for, when it comes to entry level employees or people with very less experience. I think it's a golden opportunity for the leaders, the top management or the middle management, to make interactions more human, to mentor them, to guide them.
Yeah.
So it's a golden opportunity. It's definitely. You really hit the nail in there, Sarah. And with that, I know we are short on time, but if our listeners, they would like to connect with you and explore more about the work that you do, what would be the easiest way?
Yeah. So the place I'm most active is on LinkedIn. So you can connect with me there. I also write a weekly newsletter called Big Dumb Questions, and it tackles, I would say about half the issues do live within the PM world or the agile world, but I write a lot about leadership in general. For example, this week's issue was why do we take so long to make decisions? And last week's was why do we prefer competent people over competent ones? So each issue, I take a really interesting question that I find interesting, that I've thought about a lot. I research it. I think about my position. I often crowdsource other people's answers, and then I put an issue together. And so, a great way to join a conversation with me is to follow me on LinkedIn and to subscribe to that newsletter.
Super, super. So, listeners, I'll make sure to have all these details in the show notes. So, just refer to them along with this episode on whichever platform you listen to podcasts to. And I believe what we have uncovered today is that it's not about sticky notes or jargon. Agile, it's about resilience.
Mm.
It's a way of working that allows leaders to pivot without panic, to prioritize without guilt, and to protect the people without sacrificing results. So, thank you so much, Sarah, for really, really reminding us that leadership isn't about having the perfect playbook. It is about adapting when the playbook falls apart. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation. This was a great, fun conversation.
Absolutely. And to all the listeners out there, if you're listening and you are feeling stretched thin, maybe this is the time to reframe. Instead of grinding harder, ask yourself, how can I get more agile in my choices, my way of life, living, my team rhythms, even in the way I protect my own energy? Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep blending business with balance. This is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.